October 9th, 1993. Chief Justice facing ethics charges in Rhode Island resigns. Chief Justice Thomas F. Fay of the Rhode Island Supreme Court, who faced impeachment proceedings and a criminal trial on ethics accusations, resigned today, saying he had committed no intentional wrongdoing, but wanted to relieve the state and his family of much pain and anguish. The 52-year-old Chief Justice, who temporarily stepped down from the bench in late August, told Governor Bruce Sunland in a letter that his resignation would take effect immediately. It is the second time in 7 years that a Chief Justice in Rhode Island has resigned while facing the possibility of impeachment. Chief Justice Fay's resignation came 9 days after the Rhode Island House of Representatives voted 74-15 to begin impeachment proceedings against him, and just 1 day after the House hired a former federal prosecutor, Wayne A. Budd, to lead an investigation. Criminal charges are pending. The New York Times. November 30th, 1993. Ex-Chief Justice in Rhode Island is convicted and fined. A former Chief Justice of the Rhode Island Supreme Court was found guilty today of 3 misdemeanor counts of using his position to direct more than $45,000 in arbitration work to a partner in his real estate firm. The former Chief Justice, Thomas F. Fay, was fined $3,000, the maximum under state law, and placed on 1 year's probation. Under state law, he could have been sentenced to a 3-year prison term. The former Chief Justice did not offer any defense to the 3 ethics counts, which were brought by Jeffrey B. Pine, the Rhode Island Attorney General. But Mr. Fay's lawyers, who had challenged the constitutionality of the state's ethics code, said they planned to appeal the decision to the state Superior Court, where Mr. Fay would be entitled to a jury trial. Mr. Fay appeared to be fighting back tears as Judge Gilbert V. Andevlia of the district court here pronounced him guilty on all 3 counts. Mr. Fay resigned as Chief Justice on October 8th after 7 years on the bench, in the face of an impeachment inquiry that dealt with the ethics charges and other alleged wrongdoings. The New York Times. September 2003. A few short days after we moved into new offices in a converted industrial building on the south side of Providence, a slim, well-dressed man walked into the office and went to the reception desk. He was carrying a bouquet of flowers and asked to see my secretary, Peggy. I knew he was not Peggy's husband, so I wondered what it was all about and heightened my hearing to overhear the conversation. Basically, he brought the flowers in order to welcome us to the building that we were now calling home. He seemed like a nice man. He chatted quietly with Peggy for a few minutes, which I paid scant attention to, and then he departed. I made a mental note that if I ran into him in the hall, I would certainly thank him for his kindness in welcoming us and bringing flowers to our offices. A little while later, Peggy walked into my office. Peggy knew everybody in Rhode Island and knew everybody's story. And she said, "Do you know who that was?" And I said, "I have absolutely no idea who it was." She said, "That was Judge Tom Fay." I still didn't know who he was. I wasn't from the Ocean State, hadn't been there very long anyway. So she said, just a minute, and she went back to her office and she brought me back a copy of the 2 articles from the New York Times that I just read you. I scanned them while Peggy stood aside, watching me, I think wondering what my reaction would be. After I got through reading them, I looked up at her. I really didn't have anything to say, and she said to me, "It's too bad. He was a nice man." And then she left to go back to her work, and I went back to mine, although I must admit that my curiosity was piqued a bit, and I thought it might be interesting to get to know ex-Chief Justice Fay. It didn't take long for that to happen, because the next day, Justice Fay came in again, said hello to Peggy, sat down next to her desk for a while, talked, and then got up and left. Next day, same thing. Obviously, ex-Chief Justice Fay had a lot of time on his hands. A couple of days later, when he came in, Peggy brought him into my office and introduced him to me. He plunked down in the chair next to my desk, and we talked about nothing for a few minutes. And then he said, "Nice to meet you." We shook hands. He got up and he left. But a new pattern was established. Every day, ex-Chief Justice Fay came into the office, sat down, talked to Peggy for a few minutes, came over, and if I was in the office, sat down and talked with me for a few minutes, and then he left. We didn't really talk about anything, but over time, he began to open up a little bit. Told me a little bit about his family and his life. And then on one cold, blustery, wintry day, he finally told me about what had happened. When he got all done with it, he just stared at me, waiting for my reaction. I said, "Tom," I said, "I already knew the story, but I thought it only appropriate that you tell me when you were ready to tell me." He looked at me for a minute and thought, and he said, "Father John," he was a dedicated Roman Catholic and he hadn't figured out yet that I wasn't a father. He said, "Father John," he said, he said, "one of the worst things that happened to me was that after all this was done, all my friends had deserted me. All these people that I thought were my friends, who had been friends for years, no longer wanted anything to do with me, and some of them even kicked me when I was down. And that was really even more painful to me than what had happened in my conviction and my sentencing." I put my arm on his shoulder. I said, "I'm sorry to hear that." He said, "Well, what do you think of me now?" And I said, I have to admit, I haven't experienced anything quite like this. This is the first time in my life I've ever met an ex-Chief Justice of a state Supreme Court, and your story's rather interesting to say the least. But I will tell you that the ex-Chief Justice that I've gotten to know over the last several weeks has been somebody that I've enjoyed getting to know. And one thing I do know is the past is the past. And so if it's all right with you, I'll just leave that past behind you." He looked at me again and his eyes started to fill up with tears. He mentioned again the fact that his friends had all deserted him. And I said, "You know something, Tom?" I said, "I have to tell you, those friends were never really your friends." I said, "What?" I said, "Those friends were never really your friends. Friends don't kick people when they're down. Friends hang together." He thought for a moment and then he said to me, "Friends are in rather short supply right now. I wonder if you'd be my friend. I said I would be honored. And we became immediately BFFs. And he continued his pattern every day for the next 6 years. When I was in the office, ex-Chief Justice Fay came in, sat down, talked to Peggy, came over in my office and talked to me, and went on his way. 6 years. For 6 years. The Middle Ages are what we used to call the Dark Ages of history. 12th, 13th, 14th century. I don't know why they became the Middle Ages, because certainly it was, at least from everything I've been able to read, a rather dark period in world history. The world was in turmoil economically, socially, politically, and religiously. The Jesus of the Dark Ages was a Jesus who put the fear of God in you. The Jesus of the Middle Ages was a Jesus who they believed God sent to judge them and to convict them of their sins, and that if you didn't get it right with Jesus, you were going to hell. As it said in the old creed, Jesus came to judge the quick and the dead. It was a scary Jesus. And it took centuries for that scary, judgmental, mean Jesus to work its way out of the Christian religious system. Even as late as the 18th century, the great preacher and theologian Jonathan Edwards was talking about a Jesus who committed sinners into the hands of an angry God. But by the 19th century, Jesus had a makeover. And he moved from being this judgmental, mean, put the fear in God in you Jesus, to a sweet and nice Jesus. A Jesus who we could think of as being wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. A Jesus who was a friend and not a foe. And the hymns of the day reflected it. Fairest Lord Jesus. And what a friend we have in Jesus. A Jesus who was friend, not foe. And in my opinion, it is as it should be. After all, the most powerful words I think that Jesus spoke in the whole New Testament are the words that were read to you this morning. Beautiful words, where Jesus talks about the fact that greater love has no one than to lay down one's life for their friends. And he goes on to say, you are my friends if you do what I command you. And what do I command you to do? I just command you to love each other. That's all, nothing scary, just a little love. Servants don't know what the boss is doing. Servants don't know what the master's doing, Jesus said. But friends know what the boss is thinking and doing. And you know what I'm thinking and doing, so you are my friends. You did not choose me, I chose you. And I chose you to go bear fruit, the fruit of love and peace and hope. You are my friends if you do what I command you. So here are my marching orders. You go and you live. And in those words of Jesus, I think we find the rationale for Jesus still mattering today in the 21st century. It's in those words of Jesus that we can say Jesus matters. Now let me ask you this question. I'll give you just a little time to think of an answer too. What is a true friend to you? Who is a true friend? Think about that for a second. What's a true friend? I'll tell you what I think a true friend is. I think a true friend is somebody who shares life with you and gives life to you. A friend shares life with you and gives life to you. A true friend is life-giving. Friendship is the one thing I can think of that's worth getting up in the morning for. That sharing of life. That leading with love. That occurs when you have a true friend. A true friend doesn't kick you when you're down. A true friend lifts you up. That's why I could say to ex-Chief Justice Fay that the friends that he had were never really his friends. Because a friend walks with you before you fall from grace. A true friend walks with you when you are falling from grace. And a true friend walks with you when you are gracefully trying to rise and move on. That's what a true friend does. A true friend hangs with you and leads with love no matter what. And if any friend is not doing that, then they are not really your friends. They may be an acquaintance, but they are not your friends. And this, I believe, is where the gospel walks into our lives on this morning. Because the greatest gift of all, the greatest good news of all time, is that every single one of you in this room have at least one true friend. A friend who will never kick you when you're down. A friend who will walk with you before you fall from grace, when you are falling from grace, and when you are attempting to rise and move on. This true friend was with you when you breathed your first breath, and will be with you when you breathe your last breath. This true friend never gives up on you. This true friend loves you with a love that you cannot lose. This true friend, in the words of the old hymn written by Austin Miles, walks with you and talks with you and tells you that you belong to him. This true friend is truly your BFF. And this true friend is Jesus. The friend that you cannot lose. The friend who loves you no matter what. The friend who matters now, tomorrow, and forever. A friend that should cause you to look to the heavens and sing from the depth of your soul and from your heart of hearts. What a friend. What a friend. I have in Jesus. A true BFF. What a true friend I have in Jesus.